LinkedIn presents.
I'm Rufus Griscom, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today, a journey into the mystery of sibling success. The annals of history abound with ambitious, accomplished siblings. Think of the Bronte sisters, Charlotte, Emily, and Anne. From a modest parsonage in the Yorkshire moors, the three of them produced some of the most beloved 19th century novels, including Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre. Or there's Wilbur and Orville Wright, brothers from Dayton who, with scant funds and no formal training, solved the puzzle of controlled flight. Or how about the Kennedys, Jack, Bobby, and Teddy, the most captivating trio American politics has ever seen. And it's not just the history books. Successful siblings are strewn across the contemporary landscape, too. We have the brothers Emanuel, Rahm, who was Obama's chief of staff and later mayor of Chicago, Ari, the Hollywood super agent who's among the most powerful people in show business, and Zeke, one of the most respected medical ethicists in the world. We see successful siblings also in sports: Serena and Venus Williams, Peyton and Eli Manning, Jason and Travis Kelce. In business, Susan Wojcicki, former CEO of YouTube, and her sister Anne, who co-founded 23andMe. And in literature, Jonathan Franklin and Joshua Foer. For years, journalist Susan Dominus has been fascinated by these genetically linked go-getters. She wanted to unravel the mystery of their interwoven success. What was going on at the dinner table in the houses where they grew up? Were their parents regimented taskmasters or indulgent laissez-faire types? Are there lessons here about nature versus nurture? And what, if anything, can parents like Susan and me glean from the talent-nurturing techniques that produced related superstars? Susan went looking for exceptional siblings, ultimately finding 6 families that were willing to let her in. Families that contained civil rights activists, writers, artists, Olympians, judges, and entrepreneurs. And then, good journalist that she is, Susan got to know them. She listened to their stories, listened as the kids recounted their individual paths to greatness, and then tried, as she writes in her upcoming book, The Family Dynamic, to chart those paths, quote, into some kind of map, sometimes noticing interesting intersections of those routes that they themselves had not perceived. The result, Susan says, is a book that's not only about high-achieving families, but about, quote, families that dream big and also have the skills to act effectively to realize those dreams. What are those skills and how can you cultivate them? Susan will share the answers with my colleague, fellow parent Panio Giannopoulos, right after the break.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Fields. Tune into my podcast for conversations about the sweet spot between work, meaning, and joy. And also listen to other people's questions about how to get the most out of that thing we call work. Check out Sparked wherever you enjoy podcasts.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessie Hempel, host of the Hello Monday podcast. Start your week with the Hello Monday podcast. We'll navigate career pivots. We'll learn where happiness fits in. Listen to Hello Monday with me, Jessie Hempel, on the LinkedIn Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Susan Dominus, welcome back to The Next Big Idea.
Panio, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I am too. So I loved your book. You delve into the phenomenon of high achievement among siblings, a subject you call the mystery of sibling success. I'm curious, how did you get interested in this topic?
This really is where my obsession started. I went to summer camp with the children of a family of 4 So they were cousins, and they came from a family of very high-achieving parents who were siblings, if that makes sense. So one was a famous playwright, Wendy Wasserstein. One was Bruce Wasserstein, who, there's the Bruce Wasserstein Law School named after him at Harvard. He was an extremely successful financier. And one mom was, another one of the siblings was a trailblazing woman in marketing. I seem to remember that we all thought she was involved in starting MTV, which I thought that was so cool. And so I, from a young age, I was just wondering what happened in the household of the Wassersteins such that they produced all these incredible, in other words, what were my peers' grandparents like such that their generation of parents were so unusual?
When you're at that age and you're very impressionable and you think, wow, there's this whole other, it almost feels like a whole other life. Like, what would my life have been if I were in this family or if I were in this milieu?
That's exactly it. I did wonder about that. What would it be like to have Wendy Wasserstein for your aunt? Would you think oh, I'm going to be a playwright? I felt very freed up in a way by the fact that my parents did not expect me to win an Oscar or a Tony or anything really. I mean, they really just wanted me to marry someone I loved and, be able to, as we would say in Yiddish, mache Leben, make a living, And so I was very interested in families where the culture was very bold and sky's the limit. And, I say that I wrote a book about high achieving families, but when I look back, it's really a book about families who did believe that the sky's the limit. Let's
talk about the Groffs. Because you start the book with the Groffs, and I think they are such a fascinating family, right? I mean, it feels a little Royal Tenenbaums-ish in a way, because they do these. Well, I'll let you talk about them, but I mean, maybe introduce the sort of the three siblings, and then we can talk a little bit about what the parents did. They created this world for their kids.
So the Groffs were a family that lived in Cooperstown, New York, and there were three kids. Their father was a doctor, their mother was a teacher. And so their parents didn't have extraordinary careers, but I will say that their parents fall into the category of what I call overcomers. Their father had actually lived in an orphanage, and their mother had also come from an extremely humble background. And they were incredibly hardworking and very industrious. And they raised Adam Groff, who became a serial entrepreneur, very, very financially successful in the field of healthcare. So he's a doctor, but he also started and sold very successfully several healthcare businesses. And then Lauren Groff is, I think, at least a 3 times nominated National Book Award finalist, maybe even 4. I do think she really is one of the great writers of our generation, fiction writer. And then her sister, Sarah True, is an Olympic triathlete. I was so obsessed with Lauren's writing that I went down a rabbit hole, and I wanted to know who were her siblings and who were her parents. And when I found out that Sarah was an Olympic athlete, I definitely knew I wanted to write about them in the book. Because how does one family produce people who excel in such different ways? Like, what's going on there?
Right. And it's not accidental, specifically in the Groff's case, because you talk about how it's almost like a real family production. Like, they do activities together, they have rituals together, they're always sort of goading each other on. There's the idea of groffiness, which is, it's sort of resilience, it's toughness, it's willing to take a risk. I think a lot of families, of course, parents want to encourage their kids, but they don't make such a big deal out of it, like where it becomes almost like a family coat of arms.
Well, what's interesting is that I don't even know that the Groffs consciously were aware that they were trying to instill that kind of thing in their children. It was just the way that they are. I mean, one of the kids' now adult friends said to me, how there were some households where you'd go there, you could kind of hang around and watch TV and just kick back. That wasn't the Groff household. At the Groff household, you always had to be doing something. And, Lauren would say that the imperative to do in that household is commingled in her mind with a sense of a kind of ambient anxiety that was also in the household. And I don't necessarily think it was an anxiety towards what if we don't achieve. It was just a kind of restless anxiety that had a kind of propulsive force in that household. But they were very hard workers also, and they have what they call these like feats of toughness. I think even just the family ritual that I start the chapter with on Memorial Day weekend, they had a pool in their backyard, and they would roll down the cover of the pool, and they were basically like who could stay in the freezing cold mucky water the longest. I think that sometimes when parents come from disadvantaged backgrounds, they worry that their kids are going to have it too easy, and I don't know if that was conscious for the Groffs, but they did there was a lot of I think Lauren's husband told me if you go to the Groff's house, they're going to move rocks when you go to that. You're going to there's going to be heavy lifting involved, or you're going to go for an 8-mile run, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's funny. In my family, I'm a parent, I have 3 kids, and I was really embarrassed reading that part about the Groffs having a competition who can stay in the water the longest, because I am known in my family as a total chicken. Like, we go to Greece every summer, and like I'll wade into the water toe by toe, like very slowly, and like flinching at like even the slightest
that's
cold
so
water.
funny.
So I'm like, okay, I'm clearly not modeling toughness or bravery. I'm modeling absolute elemental cowardice in front of my kids. But they
It's
all
funny,
go plowing into the water next to me. So,
I just did a cold plunge this morning, actually, at a
oh
nearby
my
pond.
gosh, I don't understand you people. It's wild.
It felt great. It was invigorating.
Let's talk a little bit more about parental involvement, because in all these families that you address, the parents are pretty heavily involved in their kids' lives, whether it's, hands-on or whether it's sort of getting tutors for them or finding people. Did you find that there were sort of research that backed up this, parental involvement? Can parents actually help their kids, or is it correlative and not causal?
Well, actually, I'm glad that you said that, because I think that there is so much parenting research that has been done that sort of tries to answer the question, and they try to get around the problem that there are genetic confounds, right? Like, so parents who are very on top of things and are very organized and are very involved with the school might be more likely to have children, by the way, who are also on top of things and very organized and involved with the school. But then there's tons of research that finds, that parents who are involved with the schools tend to have, their children have better outcomes. And everybody then tries to say, well, we've controlled for this and that. And the reason that these kids are doing better is because their parents are involved in their schools. But we don't actually know that to be true, is the truth. It's hard to separate it out. There's a lot of those confounds. There's a lot of research on parental expectations, I would say. And what's interesting about that is that although I think there is a sense that parental expectations do matter a little bit, it's also very hard to get it exactly right, because if parents set their expectations too high, it can actually be counterproductive. But also for parental involvement, I think it's interesting that in some of these families, the parents were very close with their kids, but they were not intimately involved with their schooling. So if you look at the Murguias, it was 9 people living in a tiny house. So I think they were all at some basic level physically close, and it was a very tight family. But their mom didn't speak English. The dad was, working at a factory. They weren't the kind of parents who were going in to advocate for a different teacher. They weren't going in to, argue with the teacher over a grade. I think the independence that the kids had was the flip side of the coin. They were independent, and that was its own kind of strength, as opposed to having the parents who intervened. I mean, it's interesting. One of the things that I really admired about the Groffs is that they didn't just, Janine Groff, there's this great moment when her grandchild is in a cast and she's walking, she's hobbling up the stairs, and the praise for her is, "You're so tough." I think that kind of message is in some ways better for kids than the message they get when their parents intervene.
Well, it also seems like in a lot of these families, there certainly is support, but there's also a sort of an underlying feeling of don't disappoint us. Don't disappoint the family. We're working hard, or we're sacrificing to give you these opportunities that maybe we didn't have. And so there is that kind of, I hate to call it a burden, but a responsibility where the kids feel, maybe at a young age, well, I can't mess this up. I have a chance that my parents didn't have. I'm speaking specifically maybe about the Chens, a family that immigrated from China.
I think that is a classic child of immigrant experience. But what's interesting to me is that I think the Chens articulated, Mrs. Chen, she goes by Ing. Ing, I think, really did specifically articulate the idea that they had opportunities that she did not. Yeah, actually, and also, in the Hollifields were this family of civil rights activists who I also write about, and their father, who had done very well for himself. He'd come from a very large farming family and gotten himself somehow by hook or by crook to Tuskegee, where he'd gotten a college education, the only one out of all of his siblings. But where I'm going with this is that he had to get himself all the way from his childhood home in Mississippi to Tuskegee in Alabama by himself as a 14-year-old to get an education. So he would say to his kids, he went on to build kind of a real estate fortune, frankly, but he would say to his kids, you have to do better than I did, because all you have to do to go to school is show up. They didn't have to travel through the South as a young Black kid in order to get an education. So that stuff can be really heavy. I mean, Bishop, the son in that family, was in his 70s when he was telling me that story, and I think it really weighed on him. Had he done better than his father? Had he taken advantage of all the opportunities given to him?
And one thing that it makes me think of that, although it doesn't really apply to that family, but you talk about the term the thwarted parent, which is a parent who's like their hopes or their dreams didn't quite come true. And so they, consciously or not, are sort of passing that on to their child, like to finish that dream for them, to complete that dream or a variant of that dream.
Yeah, my friend Nell Casey talks about kids who end up succeeding in fields where their parents didn't, or maybe even express themselves in some other way that their parent couldn't, right? It could even be like, sexuality or something like that. She calls that kind of kid the finishing child. I love that term.
It's a great term, yeah.
I think sometimes things just don't work out for parents in one way or another, but they have this passion for something and they want to clear a path for their children to do what they weren't able to do. And that thwarted ambition is sort of bound up, consciously or not, with their children's desire to succeed. And the parents really work to make that possible.
I think it's because there's a sort of pejorative version, right? There's the stage mom, right? When you think of a thwarted parent, there's kind of like in the wings and they're pushing their child to do something. And maybe the child doesn't even care that much or doesn't necessarily want that. But then there's also a lot of famous athletes, right? I feel like they have a father or a mother that's just, taking them to hockey practice in the morning or taking them to golf practice and is their champion. And and it seems like that dream would not come true without a parent that was that dedicated. And the reason the parent is that dedicated is because they have their own real personal connection to that dream.
I say this in the book. When your child has potential and talent and wants to pursue greatness at a pretty young age, I always think it's interesting when parents go with it, because what the child can't really appreciate when they're 9, 10, 11, 12 is what they're giving up in order to do that thing. And by the time they realize it, it might be too late. And so it's tricky. It's sort of the question of parenting in general, is how much do you let your child lead and how much do you bring your own judgment to bear? I think there are plenty of parents who would say, yeah, maybe you could be a world-class athlete, but I don't know that I'm going to have our lives revolve around that, either because I've got my own life and I want to lead it, or because you give up a lot and it's not a typical childhood.
Especially with athletics or something like that. I mean, we have a family friend and we only knew her when she was in her 20s, but her entire childhood, she trained essentially to become an Olympian. And she just was never home. I mean, she just almost had no childhood in a way. And then she got injured and never went to the Olympics. And it's rough. And I think, okay, she essentially gave up her childhood and she wanted it. But like, do you really know what you want when you're 8 years old, 9 years old, and you're committing to training, 3 hours in the morning at 5 and 5 hours after school, and that's all you do? And then, I don't know, I mean, I understand greatness comes at a cost, and I've seen enough Marvel movies, right, to parrot the hum about, sacrifice and all that. But sometimes as a parent, is it your job maybe to protect your child from their own sort of wild ambition?
Yeah, it is a tricky question of how, so in the Paulus family, which created Janet Paulus, who's like in a world-class orchestra in Mexico playing the harp. Her sister is Diane Paulus, runs the ART and is this truly innovative director. Janet went away to Interlaken to study music, I think when she was in 8th or 9th grade. And it did make it possible for her to have a career as a musician. But when it came time to decide whether Diane, her much younger sister, was going to go away to boarding school, the parents asked Janet, so what do you think? Should we send her to Interlaken? Because Diane was an extremely accomplished musician on top of everything else. And Janet said, keep her home. She really felt strongly about it. So even though it had given her so much opportunity, I mean, I never asked her if she would trade that all for having lived at home with her parents and her younger siblings, but clearly she felt strongly that there were costs to pursuing her dream.
That actually brings me to our next topic, which I've been excited to broach, which is how brothers and sisters influence each other. Because I was surprised reading this, what an enormous impact they can have on each other. I thought it was just parents just coaching their kids to greatness, but in fact, siblings have a huge effect on each other.
The way I put it in the book is that I think parents often set a tone, they set values, they set an energy, they maybe set some expectations. But in terms of how that all gets executed and what advice gets followed, that's when you really see the sibling effect come into play. So, for example, Marilyn Hollifield was graduating from high school, and one of her brothers basically said to her, you should apply to Swarthmore. So that affected where she went to college. And then she graduated from Swarthmore and really was quite adrift. She was a young Black woman in, 1969, 1970. Her older brother was graduating from Harvard Law School, and he was convinced that that was the right place for her and basically harassed her until she agreed to do it. So I do think those things are really fascinating. And I think there's also, to some degree, some level of individuation that's also really powerful. So Sarah True, tells me that I'm sure she was a terrific student, but Lauren was a superb student and Adam was a superb student. And she just decided that she wanted to excel in something that she knew they were never going to go near. So it turns out that Lauren Groff, on top of being a terrific novelist, is a tremendous athlete, but she didn't love swimming the way Sarah loved swimming. And Sarah decided that that was where she was going to excel. And she did, and she became an Olympic triathlete. And she would say that that was her domain. It was like a safe domain for her where she didn't have to fear that her sister might try to best her or, might just by being herself best her, So you do see a lot of that. I mean, I tell a story in the book about when I was in high school, my brother came home from college. Do you have a brother or a sister? I can't remember.
I have an older sister, yeah. And she was quite influential on me, yeah.
Oh, I want to hear about that. So my brother's 6 years older, and I definitely looked up to him and still do. And he came into my bedroom, I remember, said, why don't you join the school newspaper? Because I was always writing in journals and things like that. And I was like, well, we don't have one. And he was just like, that's a disgrace, and your student body is apathetic, and you need to start a school newspaper. And there had been one that had gone defunct. And I think practically just to get him out of my room, I was like, fine, I will. And then I got kind of excited about it. And I actually did. If my mother had said to me, you should start a school newspaper, I think I would have not been at all persuaded. Teenagers they're seeking autonomy. Lisa D'Amour calls it the kiss of death phenomenon, which is when parents make a suggestion, no matter how good a suggestion it is, it's the kiss of death to that idea for teenagers, or at least many of them. So yeah, there's a lot of moments. And by the way, in doing that, I really did find my vocation. So my brother was hugely influential in my life in that way. How was your sister influential in your life?
Well, one of the ways was just individuation, like as you said, where growing up, she's 4.5 years older. She was very athletic. She was great at sports. And I was, mediocre at best. I wasn't super interested in it. So at a young age, I thought, okay, she'll just take care of that. Succeeding in that. I'll be the super academic one. And she was also a good student, but that became my thing. So I was just straight A's, A+, as long as I could all the way through. And that was my sense of identity. I just thought, okay, I'm the little brainy one in the family, whereas she's super smart. It's not like she's not. And then I was weirdly athletic later, but I would just sort of just discredit it. Like it didn't become, I was like, well, not really. I played sports and then I became like a black belt at 17. But I was like, oh, that's martial arts. It's not athleticism. I was always looking for ways to not sort of, so we wouldn't step on each other's territory. And she was also very social and super popular. And I was very dorky and nerdy. So
it's very hard to imagine, Tonio.
Yeah. Well, I mean, eventually that changed. But yeah. And so I thought, we really just wanted to be our own, we did not want to touch each other's ground. It was not okay. And I often wonder what would have happened if we'd had like a tiebreaker, if we'd had a third sibling. Like, what would that person have done? I mean, maybe they would have been the artsy one or the weird one, or I don't know, maybe I was the weird one. But I do think about that in the family and that family dynamic of like, okay, you sort of, it's like a game of like Risk. Like, okay, this is my territory. I get Asia, you get Europe, you get this, I get this, you get that. And I really felt it. I mean, I don't know if it was all unconscious. I think to some degree it was even conscious. I thought, well, I can't really do that. To the point where she played guitar and I really wanted to play guitar. But I thought, oh, I can't. That's my sister does that. And then when she was, I think about 22 or 23, she moved to Greece and she left her guitar behind. And I said, can I take it with me to college? She said, sure. And then I started learning to play guitar because she gave it up. Like she literally gave up her guitar. I mean, it was, and then I played, and then I became, decent at guitar. And I felt like, well, I can only do it because my sister handed me the guitar that she used to play. I mean, it's very sort of extreme, but definitely experienced it.
Now, the question I have for you is, do you think you were doing that because you each wanted to occupy some niche for your parents, or was it between you and your sister and your parents had nothing to do with it?
I think it was for our parents. I think my entire childhood feels very performative when I look back at it.
Wow.
Like it was very much like demonstrating to our parents, like this is I mean, look, both my parents are dead, so I can slag them off all I want, but I won't. They genuinely loved us, I think, unconditionally. But I felt growing up that we really had to sort of prove our worth and prove that we were, and I guess I should give some context, immigrant parents, family restaurant, they're sacrificing so much. They're working 7 days a week. My dad's constantly at the restaurant. Have to prove that like we're worth their sacrifice. So I think that was a big part of it. We both felt this, well, I shouldn't speak for my sister, but I certainly felt this imperative to excel.
Did they ever articulate that to you? Did they say things like, we've sacrificed so much, the least you can do is? Or was it just that you saw how hard they were working and you simply wanted to do right by them?
I think they did not articulate it like that. I didn't feel that guilt. I will say once we got to college age, high school and college, and then I don't want to throw my sister under the bus, but she had some problems in college. Took a few tries, as it does for some people. I think they threw that at her, like, all the sacrifice and blah, 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 and eventually she got her degree and everything worked out. But I think it was probably pretty hard for her because there were a few years where she got like the full mother load and father load of guilt about like, look how everything we've done for you. But when we were young, ironically with me, because I was such a hyper achiever, but also very anxious about it, I think. They were always telling me, we just want you to be happy. It was almost like, pull back, calm down. We just want you to be happy. So I think they realized that maybe they'd gone a little too hard with my sister and then were kind of hoping for me to just level out a bit.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I also, for whatever reason, I still don't exactly know. I was a very hard driving, academically driven kid. I just really wanted to be the best, and really bothered me if I didn't get the highest grade on a test. And my parents were very confused by that because that's not how they had been. And, my mom, I just remember I was agonizing over a paper and we were trying to leave on vacation. And she said, just get a B, just turn it in, get a B, it's fine, Although they also did push my other siblings, quite a bit, who, even though they were very good students. But I think everybody has their own like Goldilocks sweet spot, right? Like in another family, I would have been the ideal. In my family, it's fine, get A's, but you don't have to like get the A+. Like, let's not go crazy here, Yeah. So yeah, I think it's interesting. But also your parents telling you to pull back didn't work, right? That was just a little bit, you think it was just innately who you are, or you definitely think it was a family environment?
I have to say, I am really heavily on the side of nature when it comes to nature versus nurture. I think so much of it is just hardwired. I've always felt that way just because, I don't know, from a young age, I just saw people and I thought, that's just the way they are. And then now as a parent with 3 children, who are two of them are almost 16 twins, and then one is 21. And you look at their behavior, like I have my 15-year-old daughter, Adele, by the way, who is a crazy student, like so intense, so high achieving. We went away on a ski trip. I took her and her brother, her twin brother, and on the way there, she just casually said, I heard that there's a summer program at Brown for students. I was thinking maybe about applying to it. And I said, yeah, why don't you research it and we can talk about it, in the car. And then Saturday we went skiing. And then Saturday night, I sat down with my son to rewatch a Marvel movie, like Endgame or something, 3-hour movie. She said she didn't want to. She was going to research it. By the time the movie was over, I said, let's make dinner. I sat down next to her. She had finished her application, written her essay, and just needed me to sort of put it. And I thought, that is crazy. Yeah, I mean, that level of like, she just brought it up. She followed it. She didn't ask for my help for anything. She just did it. And my other children, all super smart, but none of them would just sit down and just knock that out like that, like without even bringing me into it. And I thought, wow, that is wild. And it frankly, I mean, it really reminded me of my mother. My mother was like that. She was just driven, like, get it done, get it done. She was this dynamo. And I just thought those are just genes expressing themselves. I mean, I can't take any credit for it. I really can't.
Yeah, it's so funny because I think that parents of fraternal twins in particular have to really recognize how little control they have over their children's upbringing. I mean, I've said this a few times, but I have fraternal twins. We read them the same books until they went to school. I mean, hours, that's all we did because I'm not a very imaginative player. We just read and read and read. And we had the same rules. I used to feed them, one hand going out to the left, one to the right simultaneously. Their upbringing, the same pajamas, whatever, And one of them is now like the social chair of his fraternity at the University of Wisconsin. Huge school, very, very social. And his fraternal twin brother is at this tiny little liberal arts college, 400 kids in Santa Fe, where they basically start as a group with Aristotle as freshmen, read their way through the classics, and end up with Einstein 4 years later. Like very different children. So what do parents, how do parents affect their kids? Modeling is another one of those things that I think it's like hard to look at it because you look at parents who are loving and affectionate and empathetic, and then you say, oh, look, they've raised these very securely attached, agreeable, loving and affectionate children. Well, kind of everything is heritable, which is not to say that it's determinative, but there are genetic influences that kind of add up, and point and nudge you towards something. I mean, if you look at all the twin studies in the world, which is a way of teasing out nature and nurture, they find that 50% of the variation in a population is attributed to heredity and 50% is attributed to environment. And I think parents are like, oh, I'm responsible for, 50%, so much of what my child is going to become is from how I parent them. But the environment is everything. So in other words, environment is huge in affecting people. But parenting is a small part of that, if we're really honest. It's like It's the neighborhood you live in. It's who your kids' friends are. It's the teachers they have. It's what TV show they happen to watch. Was their bedroom sunny? It goes on and on and on and on. And how the environment affects that kid iterates with the genes that they were born with. So then why does it matter how we parent? And one of the things that I say is, first of all, we don't really know. Like modeling may really make a difference. And I think it probably does, even if it's hard to tease out if you haven't controlled for genetics. But, I think it also matters what really matters to kids is like how you are with them in the moment. Like life is an accretion of all of these tiny little moments that you have with your child. And so I think it's better to think not about like, what am I doing to make my child a certain way or have a certain outcome? But really, like, what is the relationship I want to have with my child? How do I want that child to feel when they are with me? I'm very wary of parents who think it's their job to make their kids more conscientious or gritty.
Right. Well, that's interesting because that's a very relational approach, right? It seems that there's this tradition of parents saying, my job is to sculpt my child or to make my child successful. If I do that, that's great. I've done that right. Just prepare them for the world. But that often comes at a cost, right? We have a generation of anxious kids. I'm not going to blame it on parents. It's probably social media that's doing it. But even so, it's a very appealing, in a weird way, it's appealing because it's this almost construction metaphor. It's like, I'm going to build this house. I'm going to build this kid. I'm going to make sure he wakes up at 8 o'clock on Saturdays and mows the lawn and make him disciplined and gritty and all this stuff. And then 18, he's going to go off to college and I've done my job. But in fact, your relationship with your children persists their entire lives or your entire life. And it's really a much more kind of a changing and amorphous thing. You're not building a car and pushing it out and hoping it drives well through the world. You're creating this, you're helping this sort of dynamic organism that's constantly changing and adapting. So I think a relational approach just literally makes more sense because that's how life is experienced as far as we are relationally.
And obviously our social relationships are much more integral to our happiness than our professional lives. Tons and tons of research shows us that also. So again, I can't help but wonder if the listener is then saying like, so why did you write this book about high achieving families? And I think the answer is that I went into it thinking I was going to find some special sauce, not that I was necessarily interested in applying it to my own kids. although I'm sure I wondered about it and had plenty of guilt myself when I felt like my kids weren't gritty enough or conscientious enough or whatever it was. Where did I go wrong? And I'm, very proud of both of them. But they were, and I wouldn't say they were hyper conscientious kids, Basically, I just kind of ran up pretty quickly against this reality that parents only have so much influence. And so that then what interested me really was more about not how do you make your child successful or achieve, but how do you create an environment that makes your child feel like all things are possible, that if they want to do something extraordinary, they can. How do you give them the tools that they can use and act on if they think if there's something extraordinary that they want to take on or something bold that they want to do. And I did see common themes, a little bit. And I think this is a big one for parents of our generation, which is the parents I wrote about were not afraid to expose their kid to painful experiences that the kids wanted, even if the parents thought that experience might be painful. And they weren't afraid to see their child fail. I think it's really uncomfortable for parents sometimes when their kid wants to try out for something that they know they're not going to get, or they have a dream that they're never going to that they don't have the innate talent to pursue. Marilyn Hollifield's parents, she came to her parents, I think in 9th grade or 10th grade, and said, the large white high school in Tallahassee where they were living, they're desegregating, and I would like to go. And her parents did not want her to do it.
Yeah.
They had watched the news. They had seen what was going to happen to kids like that, to kids who went and what they were going to undergo. And they didn't hold her back. And when things got really ugly, they didn't say, if you want to quit, by all means. She knew that that was always an option and that they would accept that. But they really supported her while she did this very difficult thing. And I think she came out of it really prepared to handle pretty much anything that the world threw at her.
Yeah, you also talk about openness being associated with high measures of happiness and adaptability to stress. And I thought that was, because that does seem like something you can encourage and model for your children, right? Openness to new experiences. You talk about research behind travel being actually really, really influential and in a positive way for children.
There's these big 5 personality traits that the world is broken up into. And the one that I'm most interested in, and that I think psychology researchers are most interested in recently, having moved on from this focus on how do we get kids to work and persist. Now they're interested, grit, in other words. Now they're interested in openness to experience, which is sort of curiosity, how, it's the wanting to learn kind of quality, or it's being exposed to the world. And so many of the families that I wrote about, travel was a really big value for them. Like the Groff kids, both Lauren and Adam did a year abroad before they actually went to college, and they both said it was really formative. The Paulus family was off the chain on openness to experience. The dad had traveled around the world. He packed his son off to this school program that entailed sailing the seas, and he just wanted his kids to experience all the art, all the travel, all the things, all the time. And I think you really see that in the careers that they've chosen and how their lives have turned out.
Hey you, I'm Andrew Seaman. Do you want a new job? Or do you want to move forward in your career? Well, you should listen to my weekly show called Get Hired with Andrew Seaman. We talk about it all, and it's waiting for you, yes you, wherever you get your podcasts.
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/marketer. Terms and conditions apply.
You have a piece about tutoring, musical tutoring specifically, and how tutoring one-on-one is incredibly valuable or helpful for children, but not for the reasons you'd think, but because they have a rare moment to just be one-on-one with an adult who's teaching them, with that sort of concentrated focus.
A lot of people think that like, oh, we're going to give our kid music lessons because it's going to make them smarter. It's going to make their brain like bigger somehow. There's conflicting research, but a lot of people think that people who become wonderful musicians are very bright to begin with, rather than the fact that they were trained on an instrument very early is what made them, very, very bright so, but I think that we do know that tutoring is an extremely effective way for kids to learn. And I think for like the Chen family, for example, their mother was like always, always, always by hook or by crook. She was procuring tutors for them and very educated people. She, so her kids were in the presence, like either one-on-one or in very small groups with some of the more educated, cultured people in Bristol, Virginia and Appalachia, where they grew up, which was, a pretty big town, even a small city maybe. But I thought that was really interesting. I do think that, having strong mentors is really helpful for kids. And I talk about this a little bit too, okay, let's say you do want your kid to be disciplined. How much luck do parents really have, with brute force? It rarely goes well. But coaches can do that. Brute force, no. But coaches can do that. A really strict, music teacher can inspire a kid to want to live up to that teacher's approval. This was true for the Chens. At a certain point, they weren't trying to please their mother. They were trying to please their music instructor. And so I believe in outsourcing the discipline. That's a parent's job maybe is to like encourage a kid to find a really good coach or teacher or mentor and have that relationship be a place where they learn discipline along with other kids, maybe like the Paulus family. Again, they worked very hard to have these resources, but they did have the resources to send their daughter to a ballet school that was very strict and very tough.
Or even the wrestling coach, right? That was very influential on the two sons. Both of them, I think, had the same coach.
Yang and Yi. Yeah, exactly. And what I love about that story is that their older sister, okay, we were talking, how are siblings influential?
Yeah.
The older sister looked around and said, what sport should my younger brother do? Parents didn't know from sports. They didn't know what American sports were. They're at the restaurant 7 days a week anyway. And she really admired this coach, Ed Kressel, and he'd won all kinds of awards. And she could see that he had discipline, and that was really important to their older sister. And that she also could see that her brothers weren't big kids. And so, she knew the lay of the land and thought, siblings know the lay of the land. That's what it is. Parents don't know the lay of the land. They have dreams, they have ideas, they have goals, but the siblings get it. And she was like, you are not you don't weigh a lot and but you could wrestle in your weight class and you could work with Ed Kressel, this guy who has a lot of discipline. So yeah, that was just the right kind of discipline that they benefited from for sure.
It is one of the really wilder sort of takeaways from the book is just how well our siblings know us. For those of us who have siblings, it's very often you think about your parents like, oh, do my parents know me? But your siblings, they're a witness your whole life, presumably, and they're taking it all in, and it's pretty accurate. I found like a lot of these siblings really knew each other quite well.
I think that's true. And some of the siblings were, the Murguias say that they were almost more like a system of aspen trees, than four separate trees. They, in some of these families, there's this kind of like unusual closeness, like almost not quite isolation, but, Janet and Mary Murguia, who grew up to be, one is the chief judge of the Ninth Circuit, and the other one runs Unidos US, which is a massive Latino civil rights group. They shared a bed for many years, which was also true of Serena Williams used to go from her sister's beds.
Yeah, I love that story. There was 4 beds and 5 girls.
Yeah, exactly. And so Serena would like go from bed to bed. That's what her sister told me Aisha told me when I interviewed her. And they were also a little bit isolated in the sense that they really only socialized with each other. And they had this like, everybody in the family went to bed at 10 o'clock, lights out. And it was only when she got to college, Aisha said that she realized that not everybody did that. So I think that siblings who are close benefit from that closeness sometimes because they know how to help each other and they're invested in helping each other.
So I'm curious, after all your research, how has it changed your views of parenting? I know your children are in college now, but if you were starting over as a parent with newborns, would you do anything differently?
It's funny because I was almost raising them like while I was writing this book. And every once in a while, I think they would be like, I would try something and they would be like, did you
Did you read about this?
Is this like something that you read about, you're writing about in your book? I did feel a little bit more of a responsibility to let them take whatever they wanted to do as far as possible. So my son Josh really loved soccer, and I will say that the travel teams were like quite expensive. And my husband, spent a lot of time on the weekend, and me as well. I mean, I really tried to make it to every game, but we took it as far as he wanted to take it, even though I would have rather that we were as a family going to museums on a Saturday and, cooking meals together. And, but he was really passionate about it. And I do think that seeing some of what these parents did to make opportunities possible for kids, I still don't know if it was the right thing to do or not, by the way, in a way, because sometimes I think it would have been better for everybody if things had been a little more low key. But yeah, putting opportunities in front of my kids, exposing them to as much as possible, like Lawrence Paulus, I felt was really inspiring that way, and taking advantage of everything that New York had to offer. But I also do think that at a certain point, I also let myself off the hook about this idea about, discipline and trying to enforce conscientiousness and things like that, because I started to think that I might not be that successful and I could put a lot of effort into it, and all it might do would be to damage the relationship.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And what about things like, a lot of these families had dinner rituals and, quizzes. And did you ever try to integrate? I mean, I will say my family, we do this just because it's fun, because we're a family. I mean, my wife's a writer as well. We'll have a word of the day on this big chalkboard in the dining room, and everybody will take a turn like putting up a word. We have to guess what it is. And that's a fun thing. And to me, that doesn't feel, I hope, overbearing. Although Adele finds it annoying, but the other kids find it fun. So we just kind of do it, and she grumbles a little, but we just kind of keep going.
That is so great. I mean, I think at some point we were trying to get our kids to learn poetry. We were like, in order to get your, driver's license, you need to memorize a sonnet. And again, it's this idea of like, I think just every parent realizes there's just only so much, there's so little that's worth it to force if the kid's not into it. And Leo was into it, and he memorized the sonnet, and he got to class one day, and his teacher said something about this particular sonnet and said, "Oh, you mean this one?" And like recited it off the bat, But Josh was just like, absolutely not. It's not happening. And were we going to like really, arm wrestle with him over it? So we were not that kind of family, because I think Josh really had in part like no patience for it, and we weren't going to really push it. You know what I mean? But I do love that. I tried to do Thorn in the Rose for a little while. And Thorn in the Rose is when, kids say something good that happened, something bad that happened. It's just my kids are, they're just not those kinds of kids. Like they just thought it was hokey. They just didn't want to do it, And I just, so we kind of let it go, I guess. But I think I did feel, the other thing I really thought about a lot was Diane Paulus talks about, this is really profound, I think. Diane Paulus's mother was so supportive of all the incredible things that her daughter did when she was a child. She danced with the American Ballet Theater, and she was a very serious piano player. But what she always said was that her mother had a way of watching without desire. And so her mother would she would come every night to see her dance, even if it meant she had to stand, in the last row for hours. But she didn't then give her feedback. She didn't give her critique. She didn't say, you should do more of this. You have the feeling that if Diane had been a tennis player, she would have watched the games, but she wouldn't have been more invested in the outcome of the game than Diane was herself. I mean, not that, it's like, I feel like a lot of parents whose kids do sports really wrestle with, wait a minute, why do I care so much? What exactly is going on here? Do I just not want my child to be disappointed? Do we think it reflects on us as a family somehow? I think I really, really wanted to like interrogate, what was going on the sidelines, for my husband and for me at some of those games, and try to really just take a step back, be more zen, let go. This is not our game. This is his game, and just be supportive and chill,
That's a really beautiful image of her just quietly, supportively watching her daughter every night.
And not critiquing. Yeah, I think I have to say, just as a parent myself, who's, just the sort of lived experience, but also some of what I took away in the book was just, I think parents overestimate how helpful it is for them to give a blow-by-blow or a critique after the game. I mean, Mr. Groff used to say, Lauren's father, because they were all athletes, he would say, keep the best, forget the rest. Sometimes you just need something to say when your kids like had a bad game or something. I think it's a pretty good saying, actually. It's just, okay, we're moving on, feel good about what you got and let the rest of it go. And it also says that the parent is doing the same. whatever happened, I'm not worrying about it anymore. We're moving on.
That's great. I love that. Well, Susan, thank you for joining me today. This has been edifying.
Thank you so much, Ponyo. This is so fun.
That was Susan Dominus speaking with my colleague, Ponyo Giannopoulos. Susan's book, The Family Dynamic, comes out on May 6th. You can pre-order it now by following the link in the show notes. And I want to take a minute to tell you why you should. For one thing, the book is tremendous, and it's full of stories and science that we didn't cover today. But also, pre-ordering in general is a really powerful way to support writers for a few reasons. First, every copy sold before a book is published counts toward first week sales. This means healthy pre-orders greatly improve a book's chances of hitting a bestseller list. Now, that may sound like it's all about ego, but it's not. Millions of people look at bestseller lists. Landing on one can increase a book's first-year sales by more than 50%, according to researchers at Stanford. Second, when you pre-order through your local bookstore, and I hope you do, you're sending a signal. Someone wants this book. That might mean they order an extra few copies, maybe even display them on the front table. This may sound like a small thing, but it's actually a pretty big thing. Third, publishers watch pre-orders closely. Strong numbers can unlock additional marketing support. But last but not least, when you pre-order a book, you get it the day it comes out, which personally I find to be pretty cool. So we thought we'd try something new. Pre-order The Family Dynamic. Send us a copy of your receipt to podcast@nextbigideaclub.com, and we'll give you 3 months of free access to our paid Substack Book of the Day. This is the newsletter where we share the best insights from new nonfiction every single weekday. Not to brag or anything, but one reader told us recently that it's the only newsletter they look at every day. Today's show was produced by middle child Caleb Bissinger, sound design by Mike Toda. We love working with our chosen family of successful siblings at the LinkedIn Podcast Network. I'm firstborn Rufus Griscom. See you next week.